Well, I like to tell people I've been an illustrator since I was 5 years old, when I had my first drawing published in a newspaper. It was the college newspaper where at Barrington College, where my father was a professor, and I lived on campus. My family lived on campus, so I've been doing illustrations for a very long time. However, I went to school for graphic design at the Tyler School of Art at Temple University and I did graphic design for a few years and sort of segued into illustration because I was doing a lot of artwork for the books that I was designing. And then eventually I left Headcase Design, where I was a designer illustrator, and started my own studio in 2007 or so, I would say. And that was around the same time I started doing pixel art as well. I was doing pixel art as a sort of protest art. I was using it to protest the sort of Bush administration's approach to the war on terror, the invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan. So I was doing these pixel art pieces where I was pitting Mega Man and other video game heroes against like the Bush administration. One of my favorites was a piece I did where Mega Man was fighting Dick Cheney, and he was that big tank from Mega Man 3, I think it is. So that's how I got into pixel art from doing illustration. I got into illustration when I was at Headcase Design. I was there, I had graduated as a graphic designer, and then I ended up working with one of my professors in his studio, and we were doing a lot of book design, but we started doing illustration, and it was this style I would best describe as if those little people on the bathroom signs kind of jumped down and maybe kind of evolved a little bit, but were still very graphic and simple. So I've always been attracted to abstract illustration, very simplified abstract illustration, because there's a certain universality to that where people can see themselves, everyone can see themselves in something, the simpler it gets. I've always loved that. Charlie Harper is a big illustration influence on me. So then eventually I sort of that was a natural segue into pixel art because I grew up playing video games and I used to draw pixel art on graph paper as a kid, and then I started doing it in Photoshop. The way I actually got into pixel art though was I was at a video game convention and someone was doing these big paintings of Atari characters, and I needed decor for my house. And I was like, that's cool, I could actually do that. So I started painting pixels initially, literally painting them, gridding them out on big canvases. And then eventually I realized that was too time consuming. So I started doing it in Photoshop instead. And that's kind of how I got into pixel art. And then I started doing this protest art in pixel art with Mega Man versus the Bush administration, that sort of thing. So I've mostly been doing static pixel art since 2002 or three, maybe. Pretty much after 9/11, just as a way for me to process what was happening in real time and express how I was feeling about it. And then from there, I kind of segued into illustration because I realized people actually wanted this style for commercial purposes too. It was kind of cool. I think one of my first jobs was an illustration of the band Crystal Castles, whose music sort of uses chiptune video game hardware. For it was not Rolling Stone, Mix Mag. It's a British music magazine, I believe. I think eventually I started doing some animated stuff with pixel art too. I don't recall how that started though. Oh, I know. Probably one of my first websites was I had my name come down as like little Tetris pieces. I animated little Tetris pieces falling down and forming the letters that spelled out my name. That was my very first website. I don't think that's still online anywhere, but it was pretty cool actually. I think I did it in like, I don't know, it took me like a week, but it was cool. Yes, I think my first animated pixel art was probably my name, the logo falling down from in as like Tetris pieces forming my name. I think that's the first one I can recall off, but that was like that would have probably been 2006, so it was a while ago. So I started getting pixel art commissions from actual real clients, like the Crystal Castles piece from Mixmag, and At that point, I ended up leaving my safe, comfy studio job at Headcase because I wanted to pursue my own illustration studio full time and focus on the pixel art style instead of the other style. And it's been a lot of ups and downs, but over the last 20 years almost now, I've been able to pretty much stay afloat. I've had good years and I've had bad years, but I've gotten to do a lot of really fun projects. Even in the last couple years alone, I've gotten to do some cool packaging stuff for Hasbro for their Marvel action figures that are based on the video games. I've done some gift cards for Target. I did a cool mural many years ago for the Game Developers Conference. It was this huge pixel mural that everyone had to got a giant 2-inch pixel and had to contribute to it over the course of the week. And we have a really cool time lapse of that whole week at the Game Developers Conference.
Cool.
But yeah, I've done a lot of really cool pixel art projects over the years. It's been a lot of fun, and I feel very, very grateful that I get to do this. I've been doing pixel art since about 2002. And I think my first pixel art commission for Mixmag was probably 2006 or yeah, so I guess it's been about just about 20 years that I've been doing pixel art professionally. And I do have another style, that this like infographic style that I do sometimes, but I would say that's probably gone down from like 30% to like maybe 2% of what I do now. It's mostly pixel art these days, I would say. Yeah, I would say pretty much all of it these days. I occasionally will do some sort of infographic here or there, but yeah, pretty much almost everything I do for my studio now is pixel art. I've actually really just tried to double down on it. I used to I used to try to balance it with doing pixel art and then some vector infographics, but I recently, this year, I launched a new website that's the-pixel-artist.com. Unfortunately, thepixelartist.com was already taken. But I really wanted to kind of focus on letting people know that that's who I am. I'm a pixel artist. That's what I do. I've been doing this for 20 years professionally, but probably like 40, almost 30, 40 years, out of even when I was a kid, I was drawing pixel art. I loved it. I had like the Etch-a-Sketch animator. I would draw on graph paper as a kid. So yeah, I've been doing pixel art my whole life really, but yeah, 20 years professionally, I think it feels like
Yeah.
that feels accurate to say. Yeah. I don't know if I am qualified to speak technically about what pixel art is. I will give it my best shot. Pixel art is any image that is made up of squares. Generally, it initially was electronic squares on a screen. It was a way to create early computer graphics in on computers and video game consoles, arcade machines. They could only display limited amounts of information, so there was, maybe 256 pixels by 224 pixels, and that was what they had to work with. They had limited color palettes as well. They could often, in 8-bit computing, like people think of like 8-bit video games, and I think each 8 pixel by 8 pixel square could only have like 4 colors in it, and it had to be a certain combination of colors. You know, I, it was a very limited palette, and it was just kind of this new medium though, because no one had been limited to that sort of tiny amount of information before. So it was really cool to see them create like these heroic characters and scary bosses and living worlds using these simple palettes. And I feel fortunate that I got to grow up with the first generation of video games like the Atari, and then the Nintendo, ColecoVision, and then Sega, and those, and just see that style evolve over the years. So it left a really deep impression in me, in the same way that, I mean, I read books and I watched movies and that sort of thing too, but each generation that sort of is the first to experience this sort of new style of storytelling, going from books to radio to television and movies. It's a very special to experience that as like a first generation person, because you're having all these experiences that no one has had before, and that's pretty rare, I think. So there's something special about pixel art, I think, to anyone that grew up on it. The sense of nostalgia that it brings, it's like a warm hug. It reminds you of happier times of your childhood, just staring at the screen, rescuing the princess or beating some dragon or whatever, some other cliche. I think video games have come a long way, and there's a lot more unique experiences now, but those sort of like, classic video game memories that you have. So I like to harness that in pixel art. I think that's why I like using it. It I feel like it gives me sort of a connection with the viewer right away, assuming they've had similar experiences. And even if they haven't, I can't speak for people that didn't grow up with pixel art, but I like to think that there's a certain imagined nostalgia that they have for that. Even if they didn't grow up with it, it maybe makes them feel nostalgic, sort of in the same way that me looking at sort of goofy clip art style line art from the 50s advertising, it kind of makes me feel nostalgic for that time period, even if it wasn't a time I grew up in and probably wasn't actually a great time period anyway. But my grandfather worked for Coleco that made the ColecoVision
Oh wow.
and also the Cabbage Patch dolls. So he got us a ColecoVision pretty early on. I never had the Atari, but
Uh-huh.
ColecoVision actually had an adapter that you could play Atari games with, which is
Oh
crazy.
yeah.
Can you imagine if they did that now? Like you could a thing you plug into the Switch that lets you play like Xbox games. Like they would never do
Yeah.
that now, but back then it was a different time. But yeah, so ColecoVision was my first console that my grandfather, who worked at Coleco, got for me.
So
I think it
okay.
transcends some sort of thing. It's just a connection to that source of where all these, they play like Tears of the Kingdom, but then there's something really special about playing that realistic Zelda game, but then looking back at this like little tiny boxy Link character from the first Zelda game is just like, oh, it's so simple and I don't know, there's something simple and innocent maybe about it. So through I got into base paint through Jonathan Mann, but I met Jonathan Mann through illustrator Chris Piasek, but I met illustrator Chris Piasek through my very good friend and fellow Philadelphia illustrator Mario Zucca. So I always like to trace every sort of formative, important thing that happens in my life back to the source. I think it's really important to sort of maintain gratitude for how you get to places based on the people that sort of got you there. I always like to keep these people in mind, like Mario Zucca or other people like John Gibson at I Am 8-Bit, who got me into the sort of LA scene. I always like to mention those people and be grateful for that. So Mario Zucca is an illustrator in Philly. He's a very good friend of mine. Through him, I was at an illustration conference and I met Chris Piasek, who he went to grad school with and is also a really cool illustrator. And Chris Piasek had worked with Jonathan Mann of Song a Day Man on The Fucking Trolls. That's actually what it's called. I'm not just being
Hmm.
gratuitously profane there. It's a project called The Fucking Trolls, which it was like a crypto NFT thing, which I have kind of mixed feelings about NFTs and blockchain stuff. I remember when NFTs first started, it was like, oh, that's cool, a way to sell digital art. And then everyone was like, it's really bad for the environment. It's like every NFT like kills like the planet, or I don't know. So I kind of ignored it. And then there was like that big boom where NFTs were worth a lot of money. And I was like, shit, I should have done that. And then it all crashed. And I was like, cool, I'm glad I didn't do that. That looked stupid. And anyway, I was working on a project with Jonathan Mann, who does these like song a day thing. He's been selling songs I think as NFTs for 16 years, or actually no, I guess he's been doing songs every day for 16 years. I don't know when he first started uh, minting them on the blockchain, but I was doing a project with him where I was doing pixel art for him, and he said, "Do you know about this base paint thing?" And I'm like, "What's that?" He's like, "Oh, it's a project where you paint with pixels every day and you get paid for it." And I said, "That sounds cool." So he was friends with Zach and maybe Winter. He knew the devs, so he got me a brush on base paint, It was 500 pixels, which was actually pretty good back then. I think back then the maximum size was 5,000, but most people started with 100 pixels. So I was like, okay, let's see what I can do. So I think that was around day 50 or so. It was, I think the first one I worked on was comic books or something. I think it was around day 50. And then I think I lost my streak after a couple days, so I forget what my streak is up to now, but I've been doing it, I don't even know what day we're on now, 760 something, maybe
Yeah.
770 something. I don't know. So I've been doing it for a while. The main thing is I've been doing it since day 50, and now we're up to like day 760 or 700. The first day I painted on base paint, I believe it was comic book day or comic book something or other. And I was very confused. I had no idea what the fuck was going on. There was a chat, but I was a little intimidated to use it at first. I had a very small brush. Things were just appearing, popping up here and there. I didn't really know what to do, so I think if I recall correctly, I'd have to check the timeline of all the little pixel transactions, that go through.
Hmm.
I feel like I just kind of cleaned up something. There was like a Spider-Man maybe at the top, and I don't even remember what I did. I think I had 500 pixels, so there wasn't much I could do. Or did I have 200? No, I think it was 500. I had 500 pixels. I honestly don't even remember. I just know it was chaos. I didn't know what was happening. I just did my thing and I'm like, okay. And then I came back the next day and I think it was either the next day or the day after that. I was drawing. I noticed, oh, I think my second day might have been Japan, and I drew like a cool Godzilla that I thought was pretty cool. And then it got covered up, as happens in base paint,
Mm.
because this was back when the canvas was much smaller. It was 144 pixels square, and it got covered up, and I didn't like that because I thought it was pretty cool. So the next day I came back and I said, I'm going to wait until the end of the canvas. And then I tried to draw some things. I think it was dogs. I think it was the dog canvas, maybe.
Hmm.
And I tried to send it through at the end and it wouldn't go through. I didn't know that there was like a lock on the canvas. I think it was either now it's the last 30 minutes, but I think back then it might have been 10 or 15 minutes. There's a lock on the canvas just to prevent anybody from coming in and drawing like a swastika or something horrible at the last minute. But I couldn't send my drawing through. I didn't know about the lock. So I lost my streak on like the third day. But then the next day, I think was maybe cats or something. And I did one of the first pieces I did, I remember, was for a cat canvas. And I did like a smaller version of this well-known keyboard cat pixel art that I did a long time ago. So that was the first piece I did that I was like very proud of. I minted the little work in progress so that I could have this one of a kind little pixel art piece from that. So those were my first few days. It was pretty chaotic. I didn't know what to do. Then I found out about the lock. I learned about getting your art covered up and then trying to come in at the end doesn't work because of the lock. And then I would come in later, but not at the very end. Because early on it was just really hard. It was really all about getting your art on there and keeping people from covering it up. It was a lot less collaborative in the early days. It really just was like graffiti wall, kind of just covering each other up. It's come a long way. Getting your art covered up when you first start on base paint can be very jarring. It can be very infuriating, even, especially if you think the thing that covered you up isn't as good as what you drew. So initially, I was frustrated by it. I did see it as a little bit of a game, a little bit of a competition. I didn't really have that much of a rapport with anybody on base paint because I got into it through Jonathan Mann, and he isn't like a base paint artist. He doesn't draw on base paint really. So initially it was like, okay, I gotta draw something so fucking cool that nobody wants to cover it up. They're like, that's cool, I'm not covering that up. So I kind of just focused more on that. Also drawing later in the canvas versus towards the beginning. And then eventually, people started to notice the work I was doing on the canvas. Early on, it was there weren't too many people that were doing pixel art professionally or at the level that I was doing. And I don't say that to be, you know, arrogant or egotistical. It's just true. It was mostly people that were there because it was pixel art's very easy to get into. It's a very accessible art style. I think it takes years to master, but I think it takes very little time to sort of get comfortable and just have fun with it. So I think most of the people that were doing it were sort of more at that level where they were just kind of having fun with it. You know, a lot of people early on were copying pixel art from the internet, which was not cool, and we kind of
Mm.
figured that out eventually too, was like, oh, no, that's not okay. We can't, we might get, you know, the base paint, they might get sued or something. So, you know, it was mostly just dumb stuff, little pieces. And, you know, when it's a tiny little piece in a big piece of art, it's not as big of a deal, but that was something that we eventually had to come to terms with as well, was policing people ripping off IP or ripping off other people's pixel art. Basepaint has really evolved since I first joined 700 plus days ago. In the early days, it was just a big, as we like to say on Basepaint, a plop fest, mostly people plopping down art on top of other art on top of other art. And there's something very interesting about those early pieces. That being said, I think that it's been really cool to see the canvases evolve to be much more cohesive. They feel much more like polished. And I think that really comes down to teamwork and people being more collaborative instead of competitive. I think the things that have contributed to that culture, number one was just getting rid of all the people that were just there for profit. You know, there was a big purge that kind of happened at the end of 2023, I want to say. And this was partly due to me, and I'm only saying this because I wanted an upgrade so bad. I was at 1,000 pixels, which was cool. They had upgraded me from 500 to 1,000, but I really wanted to get a bigger brush. There were people with 5,000 pixels, and I was like, I want at least 2,000. And so what I kind of did was I went on a crusade by helping them sort of purge all the bad actors, the people that would come in and just scribble in the corner just so they could make some money from that canvas. There were people that had like figured out ways to code it, so they were just literally sending like a bot was sending code to the canvas every day to like all these people were essentially like they were essentially stealing from all the artists. They were it was horrible. And so, I mean, I helped. I kind of worked with Zach. I was just going through the timeline and finding all these bad actors. And you know, I like to think that my upgrade to 5,000 was mostly due to my art, but I do think that that kind of helped. It sort of cemented me as someone who saw a lot of value in base paint in the community and wanted to make it a better place. And a big part of that was just purging like hundreds of brushes. There was hundreds of brushes, and some of these were multiple brushes owned by one person. This wasn't like all individual people, but just helping purge all of those people out so that the artists were then making more money, didn't have to worry about these like spammy little scribbles all over the place, and then also bringing in more good artists. And then also a lot of the artists that were old artists, like original artists, just got a lot better. You know, when you draw pixel art every day, you get better at it.
Mm.
I mean, there's just some people who, if you look at stuff they were doing on day one to like what they're doing now, it's incredible. They've improved more in 2 years than I've improved in 20, you know? So it's been really cool to see that. So I think the artists got better. We purged a lot of the bad actors. There were also some people that were just not good for the community. They weren't a good fit, and those people kind of left over time. And we also just kind of learned to use the chat better, and some of that is on the devs. The devs have really done a lot. They've actually added a lot of cool tools to the interface over the last year or two, that have made the experience better, that make collaboration better. The chat works better now. They added a pin function where you can pin
Mm.
messages at the top. So, you know, we put the most important messages like this is the vision for this canvas up there instead of it getting lost in the chat. They've added like cool copy paste tools. So, you know, a lot of people in the early days, people were just drawing on the canvas, but they've sort of added tools so that people can draw in Photoshop or a sprite. and then copy paste that into the canvas. We can even send code in the chat to each other. So the speed at which we can collaborate has vastly improved. The amount of people using the chat to collaborate has vastly improved. The chat itself has improved, and just the community itself. A lot of us talk off chat on Twitter now, and it's just become a lot easier to collaborate. Everyone wants to collaborate. Everyone really just wants to create the best art possible. And so I think a lot of people have sort of checked their egos at the door, so to speak, and it's just been a lot easier to collaborate when everybody just wants the best canvas possible. And there are still some people that come in, draw their cool art, and leave. But those people don't generally get their brushes upgraded as much as people who maybe don't draw art as well, but are very good at teamwork and sort of encouraging and keeping track of things. And I like to say everyone in Basepaint has a special talent that they bring to the team, that they bring to the community. And that's really true. Everyone's unique. Everyone has a very unique thing that they contribute. And that's kind of why the canvases have improved so much over the last 700 plus days. So base paint brushes, I believe I think I'm not like an NFT crypto person. I don't want people to think that about me at all. But so to contribute to base paint, you need to get a brush. I was gifted my brush by the developers because Jonathan Mann had recommended me for the project. My brush started out at 500, which is a pretty good brush to start with. Back then it was like 100 pixels. And in the early days, they would get upgraded by the developers, Zach and Winter. I don't know if there was anybody else that could do that at the time. And then eventually they doled out the power to upgrade brushes to certain other people. So the cool thing about Basepaint is that even though it was started by these three devs, Zach, Winter, and Nader, over the course of the last two years plus, they've really done a great job of entrusting various responsibilities of Basepaint to the community in a way that has honestly made their lives a lot easier, I think. I don't think Basepaint would have lasted this long if they had to just keep doing everything themselves. I just think they would have burnt out, and I think it's really great that they were able to, one, trust that certain people in the community had Basepaint's best interests at heart, and then two, like kind of figure out who those people were. So, I wouldn't say there's even any one person who's the most valuable person on Basepaint because so many people occupy very specific roles. You have Creamy, who is sort of I would say the champion, the cheerleader for Basepaint. Creamy loves Basepaint. Creamy, I think they gave Creamy partial control of the social media accounts. So I think a lot of the social media stuff that Basepaint does is Creamy.
Oh,
Creamy also is very welcoming, just always wants to give everyone a brush, always wants to upgrade everyone. Um, and I think other people like Ticklish, for example, Ticklish is not as active in base paint anymore. However, he sort of has taken over the masterpiece collection. So every 100 days, we put out a new collection. Initially, it was the first few 100 days, it was we just found like things in the canvas that were really cool and made like sort of isolated them on their own. And then we made that as like a one of a kind collection of like 100 pieces or 700 pieces. So Ticklish did the masterpiece collection, and that evolved from the masterpieces to then the fancy cursors. So now everyone has these like fancy brushes that you can see on the canvas when they're drawing. And he's been great with that. Uh, there's other people. So me, the roles that I've sort of taken on, I control the palettes. There's a few people that can update the palettes, but it's mostly me. I do 98% of the palettes. And I also, if people halfway through the canvas, they're like, "Hey, we need another black here or another red here or something," I can go in and add that. So I do the palettes. I also like to, as someone that's been doing this a long time, and also I write a lot of articles about pixel art, everything from how to get better at it to also history of pixel art is a thing I like to do on my website. I have a lot of articles about that. So I love to teach. I have a Domestika class that's pixel art that people can take online. So I love to teach people about pixel art. So I tend to give a lot of advice in chat when I see opportunities for that. When people say, "Hey, what do you think of this?" I can give them advice on the dithering, or "Hey, there's a tangent right here," or maybe try this color there because that one doesn't pop as well. So I'm sort of the resident critic, I guess. Um, I mean, there are other people that give a lot of really good advice too, though. I don't want to take any shine from them, but that's sort of what I'm known for. I'm known for giving constructive criticism. I try to be very nice about it, and I'm honest, but I think I'm fair, and I think I try to be nice about it so that people don't get too defensive and take it to heart. But there's so many people that have really valuable roles too. There's, Abby, who's very good at keeping track of anything. So like we did one canvas where it was the cursor party canvas. It had the most insane brief. We had to sort of look at our the address for our wallet and take the numbers in that, and that was like an algorithm. It was like a human generated algorithm where we would draw a specific cursor type of a specific color in a specific quadrant of the canvas. It turned out amazing. It was essentially like if an algorithm was run by humans instead of a machine. It was one of the most like fine art pieces I think we've done. But Abby, I just want to say Abby was amazing at keeping track of everyone's like address. Had they done the right cursor color in the right place? Like I would have gone insane, but he was on top of that. Daniela has these amazing sketches that she always does when she wins a theme, and whenever it's Daniela's theme, it's going to be an amazing canvas because she does her very distinctive style. There's Tlay from Thailand. She does these amazing cats. She just does incredible work. I mean, I could go on and on. There's just so many people that contribute to it now, and the devs occasionally ship out these like new updates to the chat or the tools. But that's kind of like all they have to do these days and make sure that the bills are paid. There's enough server speed or space or whatever backend stuff. But they've really just kind of handed off Basepaint to the community, and it's a very community driven thing now where they don't, they can kind of trust us for the most part to do that. So it's been really cool to see it evolve from that. And I think it's probably a huge weight off their shoulders, if I'm being honest, that they don't have to do as much as they used to, and they can trust us to kind of just be good stewards of the project. Well, the interesting thing about base paint and people getting paid for it is that it has a very different impact on people based on the value of their country's currency, because we're all getting paid in sort of this same um, thing, right? The same thing that's like, but like for me, it's just it's like extra money to get coffee and whatever. I mean, it's not like that much money for someone who lives in the United States, like but there are people in other countries. Like I know there's a guy in the Philippines, and just the value of it there is so much higher. Like, so there are people that this is their job now. They actually make enough to live off of it, which is crazy. Unfortunately, those people are not me. I just do it because I love the project. And it's great. It's not, would I do it for free? I don't know. Probably not. Not at the level that I do, but it's also not really that much money. So base paint's kind of interesting because it affects different people based on where they live financially. Some people, for example, people that live in the United States, they're not making a lot of money from it. It's not much. You make more at most jobs than you would on base paint. However, there are people like there's a guy in the Philippines that just bought a motorcycle with his base paint earnings because the value of, the value there is a lot higher. There's people in Thailand, there's people in South America that this is their full-time job now. I think Cab maybe said that this was like their full-time job now, I believe. So yeah, it's kind of cool. I mean, I'm a little jealous. I wish I could make this my job, but unfortunately, it's not very much money in United States dollars. It is a lot of fun though. Would I do it for free? I don't know, maybe. I'd probably do it less. Like if I'm having a slow work week and I can make a couple extra bucks to buy, dinner by doing base paint, yeah, sure, I'll jump on. I mean, I'm very active in it though. It's funny that I do more behind the scenes now, which I don't even get paid for, like the palettes. But everything's connected. You never know where you're gonna connect with somebody and it's gonna lead to something else. Like in the same way that connecting with Mario Zucca and then Chris Piasek connected me to Jonathan Mann, which connected me to Base Paint. Like working on Base Paint, I got to do some stuff with because of Base Paint, I think I got to do some stuff with Friend Pet. I got to do some of the bosses for the game, that Friend Pet game, which I probably wouldn't have gotten to do otherwise. Um, I've done a lot of cool stuff with Jonathan Mann, but yeah, I really enjoy helping the community flourish, contributing my areas of expertise through the color palette choices. There was a very big jump in canvas quality once I took over the palettes, I like to think, because we had bigger palettes, they were more sort of dynamic, they meshed more, the colors just kind of went together better, where some of the earlier palettes felt a little bit like just generated, by like an auto generator thing, which would just
Mm-hmm.
randomly come up with combinations. So some of the early days, the colors were kind of garish. Some of them were from lowspec.com, which is awesome, by the way. When I took over initially, I was pulling the best palettes from low spec. And then I started making my own so that I could add them to low spec. And so now there's actually like a pretty cool sort of pipeline between base paint and low spec, sort of feeding into each other in terms of the palettes and the palette examples, and sort of sharing, examples of base paints artwork on low spec as uses of those palettes. So low spec is a really cool website. It's just one guy, I think, and it's basically a collection of color palettes, pixel art, pixel art tutorials, and I feel like I'm forgetting something, but that's mostly what it is. It's a sort of an online community where people just share pixel art and also color palettes. But the color palettes are great. There's new palettes every day. I upload a color palette every couple of days. Um, and sort of, I think that's initially where Base Paint was getting many of their palettes from. And now I'm creating a lot of the palettes and feeding them back into low spec. So it's been sort of like kind of interesting to see that transition. I'd like to think Base Paint will at least make it to Canvas day 1000. It's possible it will go much longer than that, but I'd like to think it's going to at least make it to 1000. And I think at that point, a lot of people are going to maybe think like, do we keep going? And probably yes. But it does take a toll. I think that it's really important for people that contribute to Base Paint to be honest with themselves and their bodies and their minds about, you know, not overdoing it. And I think that I've seen a lot of people be very good at this, at sort of taking a step back when, they think, you're putting too many hours into this because people love it. I mean, I love it. I love drawing pixel art. I love drawing pixel art with other people. But I've noticed that there have been times when it's like, oh, wow, I spent like 3 hours a day on this for the last week, and I have other obligations. I got client jobs I got to work on, So it's been, I've personally had to learn how to take breaks when I need to. And I don't mean skip a day. I do, I got a streak to maintain, of course, but there are days when I'll just draw one pixel on the canvas, see if anybody needs anything, and everything looks great. and I don't draw on that day. I'm just, I don't, there's only so much space on the canvas anyway. I'd rather skip a day so that other people can draw, and then the next day I'm going to come back and I'm going to draw like a giant piece on there because I can. Um, so I think the longevity of base paint will come down to two things. I think it will come down to the current people that are on base paint learning how to manage their time, their energy in a way that they don't burn out. Because I think when you love something, and especially when it's financially incentivized, but more so when you really love something and you love doing it every day, it's very easy to overwork yourself. So I think people will need to everyone's going to need to learn how to manage their health, their time, etc. And then I think the other thing is just bringing in new people, because eventually people do burn out or they kind of get tired of it or they just take a step back. There's people that are still around, but they don't contribute every day. I'll look at their history and I'm like, oh, they haven't worked on a canvas in like 20 days, but now they're doing a really cool thing. So, we need to bring in new people just to kind of make sure it just keeps going. It's like any project, really. You need new blood, but you also need to maintain the longstanding contributors, the people in the community that really have done a lot, and just keep them engaged. So, you know, the tools evolving have helped. All the things that have helped it maintain the longevity, I think, also can help. Just making sure there's people to pick up the slack when, in the same way that Zach has entrusted things to me and Creamy and others. I think eventually Creamy and I are going to need to pick our successors, or at least people to sort of share the burden of some of those things with us. And I think we're doing that now. I think you're seeing that happen every day. The people that show up, the people that really are reliable, the cleanup crew. We have this cleanup crew of
Hmm.
specific people who have access to the canvas even in the last 30 minutes when it locks to everyone else. And, it's tough because it's a really stressful job. You have 30 minutes to make sure everything's fine. Usually things are great, but there are some days, like the other day, we decided last minute to add outlines to every piece of art on the canvas with 15 minutes to go.
Hmm.
Not a good idea. But we had there was I think five or six of us that were in the cleanup crew all doing it. And then we had people in chat that were drawing the lines, copying the code, pasting it into chat for those of us who have cleanup crew privileges. And
Wow.
did we get all the outlines on? No, we missed a few. We probably shouldn't have done that. It was a mistake. But it's fun. It's stressful, but it's fun. And, but cleanup crew is a very important part. Having people that do the pallets like I do is important. And so eventually I'm gonna, I probably won't be able to do the pallets forever. I'll keep doing them as long as I can, but eventually somebody else will have to step up. So, I think if the project evolves, the project survives. If it doesn't evolve, I think we'll at least make it to day 1000, but we'll see what happens. I don't think I could fully divest myself from base paint unless the project itself stopped. Um, I think it would be very difficult. I think I've already taken a little bit of a step back from, I used to be on it, probably 3 or 4 hours a day most days. And I still have days when I'm on it for a few hours, but there's also days when I check in for a few minutes, leave a pixel, and that's it. So I think as long as I can learn to recognize when I need to set boundaries and I can keep those boundaries, I think I'll probably stick with it until the end. Um, it's hard to say though, if it goes on for years and years and years, I don't know. We'll see what happens. I enjoy contributing. I've enjoyed watching it evolve. And again, I think if base paint keeps evolving when it needs to, it will survive. And I think if that happens, I will keep contributing in some way, even if it's just dropping a pixel every day, seeing what's going on, maybe minting the canvas if it turns out well, or if me or my dog make an appearance, because that's kind of an ongoing joke now, is that if someone draws me on the canvas, I mint the canvas because, oh, well, I'm on there. Now I gotta buy it. I gotta, I'm like, driving or I'm, whatever. So, or my dog sometimes ends up on the canvas too. So it's been cool to, it's cool to see, it's cool to see people and their personal lives and elements of their personal lives on certain canvases. Those are often my favorites. We did a canvas recently that was, I think, Tlay from Thailand. It was her suggestion to do road trip essentials, which I
Yep.
initially thought would be like some sort of view of like a trunk of a car with things on it. But it just ended up being a giant bus with all of us on it and our pets. And it was so sweet. And just, it was such a wholesome canvas of us all going on this road trip together. And we loved it so much, we actually did a sequel and then a third piece to kind of go along with it, where the second piece was the bus parked in the woods and we're camping in nature. And then the third canvas was the drive home overnight. And someone drew me on the bus, and I'm like passed out sleeping with like drool coming out of my mouth. So it was just really sweet to see that sort of trilogy naturally evolve. But it was just basically about the community. We weren't trying to draw anything relevant to, current events or even like some topic like anime or something silly. It was just us going on a road trip together in this virtual space, and we kind of all just drew, this experience that we all had together virtually. It was really sweet. It was really wholesome, and it's one of my favorite things we've done in the last month or so. So there's a topic that I like to bring up frequently. I made up a portmanteau. I made up a term for it: pixelflation,
Hmm.
pixel inflation. When the devs sort of handed off responsibility of upgrading and downgrading brushes to some of the longstanding community members, there were some issues where, and I won't name names, but some people were more into upgrading and some people were more into downgrading. And I think that maybe a lot of people were upgraded very quickly. And the canvas did get bigger. Now we are at 256 by 256, but it's still only like it's much fewer pixels real estate wise than the amount of pixels that exist on people's brushes. So sometimes the canvas will be done some like 4 or 5 hours in. And by done, I just mean that actually looks good enough to be done. And then people from the later time zones come in and they're like, what the hell do I do? You know? So sometimes they'll have to just completely reinvent the canvas, do something new. They'll do animation. But then there's other days where the canvas kind of flounders a bit early on, and it's good that we have all those extra pixels. This also becomes an issue because pixels are money. It's more money for certain people than others. Some people try to use up their whole brush every day to maximize the amount of money they get, and good for them. Sometimes I wish not everyone would do that. But this is sort of the part of the growing pains of base paint because people want their brushes to get bigger, but also like if the number of people stays the same, but the brushes get bigger and bigger and bigger, then the amount each person gets lowers, and also the amount of real estate on the canvas to make art shrinks, and then you're more likely to have to cover up art, improve art, make an animation, if there's no space left to draw new stuff. So growing the community, growing the project, that's the biggest challenge on the artist side, I think, is not growing too quickly. I think really for base paint to really, I mean, I think we have really great artists. I don't think we need more artists. I think, you know, maybe everyone's brush could be a little smaller to get more artists on board. I don't know. It would be really cool though if we got more collectors. I think the biggest challenge base paint has really is finding a bigger collector base. I don't really understand the ins and outs of investing in art or any of that. So I don't know if I can say much more about that, but it would be cool if there were more people collecting base paint so that the artists made more money, so that, everyone could live off of base paint and make it their full-time job. That would be cool. I'm not involved in the crypto space. I don't really like a lot of things about it. I don't like most of the people in the space. The people that I've met and become friends with are amazing, but for the most part, it just seems to be a lot of like really just people that I would want nothing to do with. That being said, I don't think base paint could work with any other technology. I think the nature of the brushes and the smart contract and the way that the money is collected for selling the artwork and then redistributed to the artists, I think it's amazing. And honestly, I think if that was how blockchain technology had been used from the beginning, and I think if that was the example of blockchain technology that society as a whole had seen, I think crypto would have succeeded. I think that it would be mainstream by now. And I think that, I think everyone involved in crypto that doesn't promote base paint fucked up. I really think that. I think that if it had been promoted more heavily, I think if everyone understood that this is what it could be doing, I think everyone would be into it at this point. I really do. And I think, if you haven't promoted base paint, if you haven't bought base paints, you know, do you even want this to succeed? Do you even want this to work? Like, that's what I would say to those people. It really frustrates me to see like base, like just promoting like all these like coin things. And it just feels like gambling to me. It just feels like more casino bullshit. And that's what people hate about crypto. They just see it as this big scam where like people invest all this money and lose it. And it's like, no, that shouldn't be what it is. That is the majority of it, though, unfortunately. But I can honestly say everyone in base paint has made a lot of money. None of us have lost money on base paint. You know what I mean? Whether it's just enough money to, you know, buy dinner and or go buy a motorcycle. This one guy saved up until he had like money to pay off his sister. He owed her like $4,000 or something. Like, you know, base paint is not gambling. Base paint is a community of artists that make pixel art every day, and people buy the pixel art and we get paid for it. It's really cool. It's not gambling, and unfortunately, everyone in crypto is so short-sighted and they just care about making profits on a coin or this or that. It's just so stupid, and it's like why I hate crypto. But yeah, it's funny because I work on this project every day that's like technically a crypto project, because it uses the technology in a really cool way. And I wish there was more stuff like that, and then I wouldn't be fucking embarrassed that I do this crypto project, I wouldn't have to hide that. It's like I feel like being an artist that does anything with blockchain now is like being like gay in the 90s, It's like I have to like hide this part of my lifestyle, you know what I mean? Like it's just like I don't know. I don't know if you should put that in, but that's kind of how I feel. It feels like this thing that I'm embarrassed to do, and I shouldn't have to feel that way, but unfortunately, all these other crypto people are fucking stupid. I don't know. So, yeah, a few canvases ago, I had the idea for us to do a W Place takeover. W Place is this giant, it's like 4 trillion pixels or something that cover the entire map of the world. Like it's basically a pixel art canvas laid over the world or something. And it's trending all the time right now. So I thought like, hey, let's draw a canvas and then let's put it on W Place as pixel art. Let's copy it over basically as we're doing it. And it turned out beautifully. It's an amazing canvas, amazing piece of art. But through the center of the artwork is base paint, really big. And so we copied it onto the W Place, which has like a million people using it at once. And it was turning out beautifully. People were kind of erasing it here and there because it's like very much like the early days of Basepaint. It's pixel artists covering each other up. And then eventually, like, I guess somebody figured out what Basepaint was, and they just started like they created like 1,000 extra alternate accounts, or they got a bunch of other people to help them. I don't know. And they just destroyed it, and they wrote NFT slop and like NFT scam all over it. And it's like we're just pixel artists doing some pixel art. Like and it's like this association is so toxic that people hate it. They hate it so much. They hate it like some people hate it more than AI, which is interesting because I hate AI. I will go on record. I hate generative AI. I think it is the worst thing that's ever happened, especially like from a visual, like to art. I mean, everything about it's just I hate it. Um, I mean, I'll ask ChatGPT to like alphabetize something for me. That's fine. That's useful. But like everything else, like, ugh. So I hate AI. Almost every artist hates AI, except for people that started using AI to make images because they can't actually make art. Those people love it. I get it. But like, yeah, mo like 98% of all artists who were doing art before AI came around hate AI. Unfortunately, a lot of them now associate AI with NFTs and crypto bros, NFT bros, AI bros. It's just they kind of all get lumped together. And there is some truth to that, but it's not fair. I don't think it's fair. I really don't think it's fair to crypto or to blockchain people because they're two different technologies. In a lot of ways, blockchain is kind of the opposite of AI because AI just generates stuff that doesn't belong to anybody. It's just this like sloppy mess of like images that were stolen from me and my other artist friends and run through these things to create new images that are awful. And whereas blockchain, you can use it to sort of create proof of
Provenance.
like
Yeah.
provenance, thank you, provenance of that where it came from. Like it came from this specific artist. So it's frustrating. I hate AI. I don't love blockchain, but I love Basepaint, which is on blockchain. So I guess I at least kind of love it a little bit, but it's frustrating to see those two things get conflated, especially by artists. So I think there's a long way to go to sort of undo all the PR damage that you know CryptoPunks and Bored Apes and all that stuff did to the perception of blockchain technology. Yeah, that's fine. I mean, we got a cool screenshot of it on the map. I think W Place even did like a cool pan in with that showed New York City. You can kind of see the start of base paint in there, but yeah, it's fine. That was actually that was such a stressful experience. I was like, God, I remember people hate it, but I didn't realize they hated it that much. They would just dedicate every minute of the day to erasing it. Like I was like, Jesus Christ, but yeah.